Hi, welcome to the Legal Insurrection Podcast. Here are your updates for the week of July 22nd. In this episode, we have a lot to discuss as always. Last week, we joked about Kamala Harris 2024, and now that looks like what we might be dealing with. We'll be talking about Obama's endorsement of her, the shape of the race, at least our prognostications, and this whole Border Czar fiasco, among many other things. My name is Kimberly Kay, and I'm the editorial and operations director with the Legal Insurrection Foundation. And I'm here with our president and founder, the uncancelable Professor William Jacobson. So let's jump on in. So it's been a really exciting week. News week anyway, as these things tend to do during election time. I have been mostly off of work this week, kind of sort of off of work this week. And so I've tried to pay attention to what's going on because the most excitement we've had here has been a possum in the yard. The dogs and one of the roosters decided to try and chase around, which was pretty fun. But the news cycle is truly crazy. It's almost House of Cards-ish, and in terms of being completely unbelievable. Starting with the fact that we were told, at least as of last week, when we were having this discussion last week, we were told that there was no chance that Biden would be dropping out. He was, reiterating his commitment to stay in the race, and then he's dropped out of the race, which is very unusual for an incumbent president to drop out ahead of a presidential election, particularly this late in the game. It's not like this decision was made in January, giving donors and everyone a time to pick the next candidate and coalesce around them. So on this Kamala Harris thing, we've covered her and her word salad way of speaking many, many times. But are you surprised that after all of the grandstanding about how Biden was refusing to drop out and how he was committed to the race, are you at all surprised that he ended up bowing out to make way for Kamala Harris?
Yeah, I don't know. He was so out of it and so frail, and there was so much pressure being put on him. I don't know if it surprised me or not. Maybe it surprised me it happened seemingly suddenly. He didn't give it a little more time to play out, but he knew he couldn't make it. He knew he wasn't up for a real campaign. So I don't know what turned him around. There's lots of rumors, lots of suggestions that people told him they would invoke the 25th Amendment if he didn't bow out, which certainly would be justified. So I don't know what did it, but I guess the speed with which it happened, going within a day from I'm in it to stay to I'm out, did surprise me, I guess, a little bit.
I think one of the best, and it was very brief, but it was one of the best synopsis of this situation that I've seen. Talked about how, being from Texas, this resonated with me anyway, is that, if you follow college sports, particularly college football, what we've seen is a mirror of that. And that once the boosters start calling for a change, you're done, you're out. And when the fundraising is pooled, and I know we've talked about that before with Hollywood even stepping in, it didn't seem to me at all organic that they were bringing in Hollywood to suggest that it was time for Biden to bow out, because that's major fundraising, major donor power there. That when the funding dries up, so do your chances. Um,
Yeah.
so, and I'm sorry, go ahead.
Biden is a very experienced political person, and when the fundraising started to dry up, that was the writing on the wall. He knows you need hundreds of millions of dollars to run a presidential campaign these days, and donors holding it back. Maybe that's what pushed him over. Maybe somebody came to him and said, the money's not going to be there. You're going to fail. You can't win, not because of the polls, but you can't win without the fundraising. So it might have been the fundraising that really pushed him over the edge, because whatever else he is, he's been a political person his entire life, and he understands the donor flows are critical.
No, I completely agree. Um, so his speech from the Oval Office, I found kind of unremarkable, but I found some of the surrounding things there, um, mainly in watching Jill Biden and all of this. It seemed to be, I mean, it kind of reminded me of Hillary at Trump's inauguration, when the scene of her walking through and she's in tears, trying to hold back the tears because, it should have been her. But it was Jill Biden's reaction in all of this that seemed to be a little bit more concerning to me than Joe's, because I'm not at all convinced that Biden is 100% there. But she seemed to be very unhappy, and her face seemed to very clearly communicate that as well. Was there anything from that speech and those surrounding circumstances that struck you or that you found interesting or odd?
Well, I think, it would not be surprising if Dr. Jill was very upset, because this was not her decision. This was forced on them. So she had to capitulate. The overall presentation from the White House, I thought, showed him as being extremely frail, in many ways confirming what we all saw at the debate. This was the ideal circumstance for him. It was in the Oval Office. It was teleprompter. It was heavily make-upped. And he still came across as a really old, frail person who had trouble, in many ways, even reading the teleprompter. And if there's anything Joe Biden was always good at, it's reading off a teleprompter. And so I think it confirmed he was not up to the campaign, much less the job. And so I thought it was very troubling. It was non-substantive. He never explained why he dropped out. He never really discussed that at all. And what he did is he allowed the media to falsely portray this as some, magnanimous gesture that will go down in history as, the selfless politician who gives up power for the good of the nation. And we all know that's BS. He was forced out. He was forced out by other Democrat politicians. He was forced out by the polling. And as we just discussed, more than anything, he was forced out by the donors. So this was a completely false portrayal. It was a show, and it was a fake show that confirmed what we always believed about him.
Yeah, and one of the things that's interesting to me, so I've spent the better part of this week, we homeschool, and so in the upcoming fall co-op, we'll be, I'm teaching a class calling it Journalism or J School Junior and Digital Citizenship. So I've been digging back into a bunch of old resources and things that I've read. And if y'all haven't read Trust Me, I'm Lying by Ryan Holiday, it's a fantastic book. It's about 10 years old at this point. But what it talks about is how, of course, we know that the media is not always honest, the media at large, the mainstream media. That was especially apparent in Obama's administration, how much they were holding water for him. I think that was, really or at least earth-shattering for many people to see just how biased our media was, because we had such a divisive candidate and president there that they were no longer masking it. But I think it's just in rereading through some of this and just being reminded that our dichotomy can't be right and left or blue and red. And I think we have been so conditioned to look at things one-dimensionally, but the entire system is manipulated constantly from outside forces. And it's all a show, and that's where I'm definitely with Shakespeare on this one. All the world's a stage. None of this is real. We definitely have instances where things are happening. This happens in this place. There's no one instigating. There's no one behind it. More often than not, especially on the national news front, though. And I think having done this for at least for me, I've been in the political realm for 12, 13 years. And I know you started Legal Insurrection blog 15 years ago. None of it is as straightforward as it seems. Whether it's Occupy Wall Street, whether it's any of the campus protests that we've seen this summer, which is just an Occupy Redux. None of these things that appear to be organic, none of these things that's what they want us to believe, but that's not what's actually happening, because there's always power players behind the scenes manipulating things, and the expectation and the hope is that we take them at face value. And so I think it's just important, especially going into this election season. I mean, because when we started this a month ago, we're joking around about how, oh no, they're starting to call for him to drop out, but who knows what's going to happen. And then here we are. Now we have him in some very odd turn of events. He has dropped out, and now we have Kamala Harris. So I wanted to ask you about Kamala Harris, because at least from where I sit, I think she's just a complete joke. And for whatever feminism prop that, certain ideologies or certain people want to use her as, I don't think she at all lives up to those expectations. She's not particularly bright. She's not well spoken. She's not someone that champions anything that, I guess, if you like to divide things this way, that women could be proud of. So outside of her checking a handful of DEI boxes, what does this look like now that she's basically the front runner? I mean, the Democrats haven't held their convention yet, but at least at this point, it seems as though there's an appearance of coalescence around her as the presumptive candidate.
Yeah, well, I think we need to assume she will be the nominee. Anything, of course, we've seen strange things over the last 3 weeks, but anything in the next 3 to 4 weeks could happen. I don't see a circumstance under which she's not the nominee unless there is something that shakes the system again. Something comes out about her history that was not previously known. We need to understand Kamala Harris has not really been subject to national scrutiny the way other candidates have. I mean, no one's been subject to more scrutiny than Trump. We've got basically a decade of digging into every nook and cranny of his life. Other candidates have been subject to the same thing. She really hasn't been. Her campaign never got off the ground in the primary. She dropped out before the first primary in 2020. And it's really the primary system which is the first true vetting. And she never had to go through it, and she never went through it. She's not been scrutinized as to her, being vice president, because that was just essentially an appointment. And in a presidential campaign, the vice president gets some scrutiny, but nothing like the president does. So there could be something that comes out. I mean, one of the things that, really astounds me is we know relatively little about her growing up. We know relatively little about her life. We know everything about everybody else who's in that political posture, but we know relatively little about her. I read today, I don't know if it's true or not, that her mother never even bothered to obtain U.S. citizenship. And I'm not sure her father did either, or I think maybe he did later in life. And she mostly grew up in Canada. I mean, this is not a usual profile for a U.S. presidential candidate. And she hasn't been subject to that scrutiny. Are we going to see her high school yearbooks like we did for Brett Kavanaugh? Are people going to really dig into her past? And maybe there's nothing there. We don't know. But if something were to come out in the next 3 to 4 weeks that really shakes Democrat donor confidence in her ability to win and changes the polling, then maybe we get somebody else. But I wouldn't bet on that. I think the betting line is she's going to be the nominee.
Well, I mean, there is dirt. There's no doubt dirt. That's just my presumption, because there's dirt on everyone. And whatever dirt there is, someone has. It's just a matter of, who has it and who wants her to move forward and who doesn't, as to whether or not that will be made public, or if we're only going to see that on small blogs from people, more of the insurgent progressive part of the Democratic Party. And, then it'll be squelched at the national level, without proper verification and the things that they do there. But I think it'll be really interesting to see, because her presidential candidacy 4 years ago was very short-lived.
She was going to lose the California primary, so she dropped out. She was going to get clobbered in her home state. Okay. And so she dropped out rather than being completely humiliated. And, CNN came out within the last hour, I believe, with a video of her from 2020 endorsing defunding the police. People really haven't dug into her as deeply as need be. And of course, there's that other phenomenon, I'll jump ahead. I don't know if it's on our agenda, but the other phenomenon of the media trying to erase her history. There is already
Yes.
a lot there for people to know about. And CNN coming out with this, it was Andrew Kaczynski, I think that's how it's pronounced, who has kind of developed an expertise over really the last decade at finding old things. And in fairness to him, although he's CNN now, I think he used to be BuzzFeed, he will bring
Yeah,
out
he
stuff
was.
that's negative to Democrats, And so he just rolled out a tape of her in 2020 endorsing defunding the police. So, that in and of itself isn't going to move the needle and knock her out. But the more of that stuff that comes out, it might affect the polling, and the polling might affect whether she gets anointed or not.
Well, there was actually a great video. I know we had seen, it was a campaign video, but it's probably one of the most impactful ones I've seen in a long time because it's just her talking. I mean, the whole point was that she's going to be terrible, and I understand the strategy, even on the state and local level, of running against Kamala. That's not uncommon in a presidential election year. Or Kamala, however you say it. If that's even her
Well,
name.
you're very racist if you mispronounce it.
I know,
Just a little
right?
anecdote. But several years ago, when she first appeared, I think as VP candidate, they literally said, if you pronounce it Kamala instead of Kamala, you're racist. And then people found videos of her pronouncing it Kamala. So that's what we're
That's
in
like
for.
me.
That's what we're in for.
No, I know. And I mean, but that's like
All
me.
over you.
Oh, for sure. But it's like me suggesting that, you're racist if you can't spell my name correctly, or like you harbor some deep-seated Cajun hate. I don't know how that would work. But no, there was a campaign ad, and I thought it was fantastic because, like I said, they just let her make the point for them, and there was a clip of her talking about defunding the police. I mean, it was just this brutal reel after reel after reel after reel of her saying ridiculous things about how she would ban fracking, how she, even workers in the oil and gas industry, how they just need a transition time. It's like on every single thing that might tip a swing state at all, she's on the wrong side of it. And so I don't know. I think it'll be really interesting. And so, I mean, to your point, let's talk about that. Let's talk about this concerted effort. I mean, I know we saw this. We used to have Wikipedia wars, right? Where you could tell if something was going to happen. There would be people on Wikipedia who were actively trying to change entries ahead of time or instantly. We used to see this a lot. But now the mainstream media is involved with this Border Czar fiasco. And I know you did a hot take video about this, which you can also find in our channels. So what, I mean, if this is already happening, first of all, let's talk about that and talk about how important that is, because I think if anything, it signals that they know that this border issue is a problem. And at least to our knowledge, this is one of the first things they're trying to memory hole. So for those who might not be aware, can you explain what happened there for our listeners?
Yeah. So what happened is the Harris campaign, Democrat operatives, media, all the same thing, have identified certain problems that she has. And the biggest of them is her responsibility for the border. And I'm actually surprised this has become a controversy. We're in those typical word games. So back when she was new, I think it was 2021 as VP, she was appointed Border Czar. Now, Border Czar is not technically an office of the United States, but it's what everybody called her. We've got a lot of people who have been designated the czar of this, czar of that. It's not technically a position, but it's a title that people are given to signify they're in charge of something. And she was the Border Czar. Everybody said it. It was no secret. And she never said, well, wait a second, I'm not the Border Czar. Why are you calling me the Border Czar? No, it was natural. But now that she's the nominee, it's a problem for her because I believe the border and illegal immigration and illegal migration, is the single biggest issue this year. Republicans need to hammer it home as much as they possibly can, because it's now not just affecting Texas and Arizona and New Mexico and Southern California. It's affecting Chicago and New York and Massachusetts and New York City. It is now a national issue. And so they're now denying. Axios ran a story, and Axios has obtained a lot of, influence, particularly online. Axios ran a story saying, "Oh, she was never called the Border Czar." No, that's not true. All these right wingers saying that's actually not true. And one of the beauties of X, formerly Twitter, is they have this thing called community notes, and people started posting examples of Axios calling her the Border Czar in 2021.
I love it.
Okay. And that really blew up. So what did Axios do? Not just say, "Oh, this story we just wrote in 2024 is wrong. We apologize. Everybody, including us, called her the border." No, what they did is they went back to the original story and they put an editor's note that they mistakenly used the term Border Czar. So they didn't memory hold their prior posts, but they put an editor's note that, it's weird. And that, that I think is what's going to happen. And then there was another thing that happened that was something called GovTrack. It's not a government entity. It's a private website, which I think has as far as I know, I've never heard anything negative about it. It's just one of those things that tracks what the government does and analyzes it. And I think it had, as far as I know, a pretty pristine reputation. Never heard anything bad about GovTrack. And what GovTrack did is in 2019, they rated her the most liberal senator in the U.S. Senate. That means to the left of Bernie Sanders. And the Trump campaign or the Trump PACs have been using that rating in their advertising against her, that she's the most rated, the most. So what did GovTrack do? They took down the page from 2019 and they posted, I'm not sure if it was in replacement for it or separate, but they posted a statement saying, our methodology that we previously used is not correct. We should not have done this. This was totally wrong. And they only did it because it was being used against her in this campaign cycle. So they memory hold it, and I compared it to what the Soviets used to do. The Soviets had a team. Stalin had a team of people who would airbrush out photo retouchers. That's what they used to call. For all you young kids out there, it was photo retouching before the days of Photoshop. Okay, where they would have to physically and mechanically, retouch the photo, and they would remove people from photos who were no longer in political favor. That's what Stalin would do. And they would also order the Soviet encyclopedia, which was distributed nationally. And, pre-internet, that's all you had. If you're a kid growing up in Siberia, all you have is the Soviet encyclopedia. They would literally have pages removed or new pages substituted for them in the encyclopedia. So they disappeared people and they disappeared issues by removing their pages and substituting new pages. And one of the examples that I put up on the screen for that, hot take was Beria, who was the Soviet secret police chief when he fell out of favor. They actually distributed new substitute pages to go where his bio was, of pages about other people. And so that's what we're really, as much as you hate the mainstream media, you don't hate it enough. They are doing stuff now, and it's only July. They are doing stuff now that I think is so much worse than even what they did in prior election cycles. They're not only lying about Trump, they're not only lying about Republicans, they're not only, falsely portraying the policies of Harris, they're literally rewriting history. They're memory holding things. They're only doing it for one reason, because all the stuff they've been reporting for years about her is now not helpful to her. And that's what they're doing. So I think that we're in a fairly disgusting period where trust in the media is extraordinarily low. But even at that extraordinarily low level, it's way too high. I mean, when you see what they're all doing, memory holding this stuff and pretending it didn't happen and removing pages of their reporting, this is bad stuff.
I completely agree. I mean, and on the converse, one of my favorite examples of this memory holding, whenever I'm asked about this, is just try and find Trump's speech that he posted, I think, to Facebook and Twitter on January 6th, where they did a short video of him talking about how everyone needs to go home with peace and love in their hearts. I mean, it was pretty short, but good luck finding that anywhere. It's the video that got him booted off of all of these social media platforms. People that were sharing it were deplatformed. I mean, just regular people who are just sharing this video because they don't want you to know that side of the story. And I mean, I think it's a very dangerous time too. And as you said, I mean, trust in media it's completely diminished. No one trusts anyone. And I think that's almost by design here. So then who is reliable? Who do you go to for news? Who do you go to find out what's going on? I mean, it's something we have struggled with even on the blog. We've always been and really prided ourselves in being very careful about sticking to the facts. We've never tried to be a breaking news site because our philosophy has always been to just wait and see. We don't want to, because no one does any fact checking anymore, legitimate fact checking. These reporters are given something, they run with it, and no one bothers to follow up. Particularly during election season, we see this happening all the time. And the New York Times is, I think, one of the worst defenders of this, running as fact a source who knows someone, right? Like we're getting third-hand gossip, and that's being presented as fact. And I think it makes our job significantly more challenging as we're trying to verify things. And even though we don't jump to things immediately, it's because we're trying to get a better assessment, at least of the information that's available of what's going on. And I think, I think it's something we do a very good job at, but it's also because we're very aware of that and we're very careful. But it does present problems if you're someone who's just trying to be informed. Who do you trust and who do you believe? And if we're looking at the way these things have gone historically, it's part of the plan, and I'm not even whoever would be behind a plan, but is to diminish faith in the system, right? And all the different kinds of systems and the things that make up our system of life, our system of government, our culture. And so when you diminish faith in those, different parts of our society begin to collapse. And I think that's part of what's happened here.
Yeah.
So
one of the additional things that I found is that Google is becoming increasingly worthless as a search engine. I've got to look into alternatives. You can't find anything that you want to find. Everything is so manipulated. It really is almost worthless. It's not too terrible at finding current stuff if something's in the news right now, but many times in the recent week or two, I've been going back trying to find things that happened a year or two ago regarding Harris, and you can't find them. They don't show up. It's completely almost worthless to use Google searches right now. Something is going on there, whether it's deliberate or it's not, whether it's political or it's not. I don't know, but something has gone on. I have found Google increasingly worthless, which is a problem. I don't know what other browser what other search engine to use, because a lot of the search engines work off of Google. So I think there will be studies, and I'm sure it'll be more systematic than my anecdotal, which will show that Google is manipulating the election. Because if you can't find, when you search for Trump and you search for Harris, and Harris turns up nice stuff and Trump only turns up bad stuff, then I think, there have been claims that translates into a certain number of votes. I don't know if, that's true or not, but there's no question it has an impact, because people are fed a steady stream of things about Trump that are only negative, and a steady stream of things about Harris that are mostly only positive.
Yeah, I mean, it becomes very challenging. And I know even just in the work that we do, if I'm trying to find something, so it's like, I know someone said something. I remember a very particular issue, like the Border Czar fiasco. And there was a big to do too. There was a whole scandal around that about Harris saying that, she was supposedly appointed to this position, but then never went to the border. And so there was a whole to do about that. And, you try and find things and they're impossible to find. You get to page 10 and you're still not finding what it is that you want to find. And we know that the algorithms have been manipulated. I don't think it's accidental that they started doing the same thing with social media, where you used to get, even on Twitter, which you do at least kind of have that option now, or X, whatever it's called. But you used to have a timeline, right? And your timeline would be successive. And now they don't do that. The algorithm wants to show you the things it wants to show you, as opposed to just letting you see the things that you have signed up to see. And so, I absolutely think that this is hugely problematic, particularly given Google's reach. They own YouTube. Just the tentacles are big and broad and reach into so many different places in so many different ways that it's very, very concerning. And that's a whole ball of wax unto itself. But to shift gears a little bit, let's talk about, I think this should be considered the Democrats, or at least the anti-Israel, anti-Semitism version of January 6th, what happened with the Netanyahu speech. And I would like to hear your thoughts on that. I know you talked a lot about this as well. Since I have been kind of out of pocket this week, I haven't followed it as closely as you have. But at least the imagery that I saw was just horrific and horrendous and completely indefensible. And unlike the January 6th participants, and even people who weren't at all participating, who found themselves, charged with all kinds of things and even in jail, these people were let go scot-free. So can you tell us a little bit, first of all, about what happened? And then, your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, was invited to speak to a joint session of Congress. And about 100 Democrats boycotted it, including Kamala Harris, who, as the president of the Senate, that's her job. Her job is to preside at joint sessions of Congress, because they're not that common. And because it's a joint session, you don't have the Republican House Speaker or the Democrat Majority Leader. So at a joint session, the Vice President, as President of the Senate, is the one who presides. And she's known about this meeting, about this joint session, for, I forget when it was scheduled. I think it's approaching 2 months ago. It was scheduled a long time ago. So what does she do? She schedules herself to speak to a sorority during that time period. So that was bad sign number one about her. But outside, and by the way, Netanyahu's speech was great, contrary to what a lot of the media people are claiming. It was really a great speech. He did not attack Biden. He praised Biden for his 5 decades of support. He praised Trump for all the things Trump did. He reached out his hand to the U.S. We're in this forever. But the biggest diss, and I love this, is he didn't mention Harris once. Okay, everybody knows she's a major, major problem. We'll get to that maybe. But she's an enormous problem. She's a creature of the left. Unlike Biden, who's just a political creature, she's a creature of the left. So anyway, outside, it was a highly organized, quote unquote, protest, but it was more than a protest. It was basically a riot. Okay, I'm not sure I've seen a head count, but it was somewhere from the several. There were, I think, multiple thousands of people, but there were also several hundred who flat out rioted. They attacked police. They defaced monuments. They tried to breach the police lines. There was one video circulated of them dragging a park policeman, and they spray painted the monuments, including Hamas is coming. Really terrible stuff. They burnt American flags. They took down the flags from the poles on federal property and replaced them with Palestinian flags. So it's basically everything I've been saying and we've been saying for a decade is that they are not just against Israel. These are anti-American hoodlums who target Israel first, but we're ultimately in their sights. And there were some arrests, but first of all, not a lot, because the park police and the other police were understaffed, undermanned. They didn't have nobody sent them reinforcements. So these people were allowed to run amok for a long period of time. There were some arrests, not many, I think 4 or 5, and they were released the next day, or if not that night. Again, this is typical what happens, and it lets them know you can do this and get away with it. There are videos circulating on X where the people doing the spray painting didn't even have their faces covered. We have photographs of people defacing federal monuments on federal property, and as far as I know, as of the time we started this, none of them have been arrested. Where is the FBI? Where is the FBI hunting down people with facial recognition technology like they did people, grandma who happened to stroll into the Capitol through open doors? Where is the FBI? I mean, if you want, so this whole thing speaks to not just how, nasty and perverse the anti-Israel movement has become. It also speaks to the corruption of our federal law enforcement. They should have been there with thousands of cops. They should have been there arresting people and prosecuting them. Maybe they will. Maybe from public pressure, these people who are on video. And by the way, they're almost all women. Okay, that's another phenomenon we've seen and written about at the website, which is, there's something wrong with the young women here, mentally ill young women who have moved to the forefront of the, violent, destructive protests. I mean, video after video after video. They're almost all, early 20s women, it's something's wrong there psychologically. But put that aside. And so that's what it is. They ran amok. They defaced our property. They burned our flag. You may have a constitutional right to burn an American flag, but you don't have a constitutional right to burn somebody else's American flag. Okay?
That's right.
If you have your own, you have a constitutional right to burn it, but you don't get to pull it down from a federal government flagpole and burn it. Okay? And if Trump supporters did that, they would be prosecuted to the hilt. We would be having perp walks as we speak. There would be a federal DOJ task force put together like they did for J6. Okay? None of that is happening. None of it is happening. And that should be a wake-up call that this country is going down the tubes because we have a corrupt media and we have a corrupt federal prosecutorial function.
No, I mean, I completely agree with everything you said. One thing I want to go back to, I know it's something we've discussed at least on the peripheral in previous episodes, is the fact that, you have the Democrats and then you have the progressives, and that the Democrats have beget the progressive wing, which is now a problem for them. And as you just mentioned, that Harris is a product of the left. She's not just a political Democrat. And these are two very different things. Can you talk a little bit about the difference there and the kind of problems that poses, especially when dealing with things like anti-Semitism, when dealing with our relationship with Israel? Because, I mean, to me, this, of all the things, the border aside, this is one of the most concerning parts of her ideology, or at least how she presents.
Well, the progressive wing, the AOCs of the world, the Ilhan Omars of the world, at their core hate this country. Okay? They hate what the country is. They hate capitalism. While they, of course, cash in on capitalism, they claim to hate it. They are in favor of destruction. And she comes from that movement. Okay, maybe she's not been as visible in that movement as Omar and Tlaib and AOC, but that's her movement. She was to the left of Bernie Sanders. We can't say that enough. This is the Democrat presumptive nominee was to the left of Bernie Sanders, and the media is going to try to hide that. So all of the things that you would have been worried about from Bernie Sanders, you need to worry about even more from Kamala Harris, because she's to the left of Bernie Sanders. She is a threat to our relationship with Israel. she'll say the perfunctory, oh, of course we, respect Israel's right to defend itself and we will always be there with Israel. But everything she does is the opposite. When she met with Netanyahu, and normally when you have these meetings, there's minutes to more than minutes of where they're together, they're seen chatting, they might take some press things, and they spend some time together. And not her. They walked out on stage, they shook hands or said hello, and they literally 14 seconds in front of the media. That's sign number one. Then they went into the meeting, and she came out, and she was as angry as I've ever seen her. Okay, now I haven't studied her carefully, her prior political campaigns, but she was the angriest and nastiest I've ever seen her. She lashed out at Israel. She blamed Israel for everything. Again, she had the perfunctory words about Israel's right to defend itself, blah, blah, blah. But she said, I am not going to be silent over what's going on in Gaza. Well, who's demanding you be silent? Who in this country has been silent? Nobody has been silenced about it, but she portrays it like she's the victim. She portrays it like, everything is Israel's fault. She says, and I just told Prime Minister Netanyahu he better get a deal done, as if he's been the problem. It's been highly documented that Hamas is the one walking away from deals, that Israel accepted Biden's plan. Biden, of course, tried to present it as Israel's plan, but it was really Biden's plan. Israel accepted it, and Hamas didn't. And yet she's on stage telling Israel they better get a deal done. Really, there's something wrong with her. Okay, she is not the laughing, giggling, sort of unserious person she's portrayed to be. I think in that moment, post her meeting with Netanyahu, the real Kamala Harris came out, and she's hardcore left. She is basically Obama without Obama's pedigree, without his intelligence. And that's more dangerous. She's basically an Obama Democrat without the intelligence that Obama had. And that's dangerous. That's the most dangerous of all. And she's far left. And really, people are going to be longing for the days that Joe Biden was leading the Democrat Party, because Kamala Harris is 1,000 times worse.
No, you took the words right out of my mouth. To me, one of the most dangerous parts of her is that she's pretty dumb. Yeah. At least if she's someone who's intelligent, they have the ability themselves to have some kind of, or at least more agency in their own thoughts, and at least that becomes predictable to a certain extent. That's something that can be reasoned with to a certain extent, appealed to a certain extent. But she's so empty-headed. It's like she is full of leftist ideology without the intellect to back it up, and that's scary. If you haven't seen, there's a montage going around, and it has got 10 or 12 different clips of her saying, it's time to see what can be unburdened by what has been seen. So if you can figure out, I guess this is her attempt at profundity or something. I don't know. And she says this with the exact same hand motions over and over and over and over again. And if this is the best she can do, it's going to be interesting.
People should not make the mistake of underestimating her. She was a terrible candidate in 2020. She's not likable, but she is willing to follow instructions. And she's, I think, somebody should not be taken lightly, and do not shy away from bringing out her record just because you're going to get called racist, sexist, blah, 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 blah. Okay? People need to be aware. And the one good thing about running against her is she has a history. She has videotape. She has internet pages, no matter how many of them they take down. They've been saved in the Wayback Machine. And this is an opportunity, if I were a Republican strategist, and I've been so wrong about politics so many times, maybe I'm a counterindicator, but if I were a Republican, I would be using the next 3 weeks. In fact, I would be using today to define her. I would be pounding whatever advertising you have reserved for October, run it now. okay, because the public doesn't know really who she is. Trump,
Right.
they can throw anything they want at Trump. It's not going to move the needle much, okay?
No,
It's
it's
been 10 years of relentless attacks on Trump. It's not going to change the needle much. Uh, Kamala Harris, it could change the needle because people don't understand how bad she is. And now is the chance to define her before the media gets a chance to glorify her. So I have read that there is a lot of that running, that they're running ads in 5 states, I think it is. I did see just anecdotally on X somebody who is a supporter of hers saying, this is really bad. I saw 5 anti-Harris ads running during the Phillies game last night. Okay, and so I'm hopeful that they are defining her now because her anti-fracking comments, her anti-energy comments, um, her police defunding comments are not going to sell well in a place like Pennsylvania. They might sell well in certain parts of Pennsylvania, but that's a real problem. Now is the time to define her.
No, I completely agree. And I mean, even to the point where her campaign her campaign, I don't even know how all this works, whose campaign it is now since Biden is out, but whatever. The powers that be behind their campaign, that I guess is now hers, were trying to score points on Trump, who originally had agreed to debate Biden. I think it was sometime early September. That was the next scheduled debate. And I'm not sure what was happening behind the scenes there, but I think they wanted to wait. But the thing is, I don't blame the Trump campaign because technically she hasn't received the nomination yet. So if they want to hold off a week or so so that they can get their ducks in a row, I don't think that's a problem. They agreed to it when Biden was going to be the nominee as the incumbent president running for reelection. But they were trying to score what seemed like cheap political points to me, and a little bit of bravado, like they're going to smack at Trump for backing down. But you can accuse Trump of many things. Backing down is not one of them. That's not an attack that's going to stick. So the last thing I want to talk about, which is not really political but does impact our way of life, seeing is that you and I both like to fly Southwest. And so I saw the news yesterday that they have changed or will be changing um, the way that they board the plane. So you will actually have reserved seating instead of just getting on and finding a seat. And for me, I don't like this change. I mean, as much as I don't like being in kindergarten again and having to stand in line at a very certain spot in line, I mind that far less than the trajectory of this. Because the last time I traveled for the foundation, which was the first time I've flown United in a long time because I usually try to fly Southwest, the nickel and diming is getting so absurd that I'm concerned that the same thing is going to happen to our beloved Southwest.
Yeah, I had not heard of that, but I like the open seating concept.
I
I
do too.
like, you know, I pay the extra $15 or whatever for the automatic, so you always get A.
Mm-hmm.
I like that. I would not want to see them change that. This is the first I'm hearing that they are changing it. I think it's what makes them different. So I'm against that. And if are there upcharges for that to reserve a seat? Are they going to have 2 classes, unreserved and reserved seating? I don't know how they're doing this.
I don't know. All I know is that they're going to be changing it to assigned seats, which part of the reason I like to fly Southwest, especially if I have my kids, is we don't have to deal with the hassle of finding a flight with seats because they're small. I can get on a plane and we can all sit together, and there's never an issue with it. And most people don't have a problem with letting us sit together because no one has paid an extra $35 for whichever seat they're sitting in. And so, to me, it's
Yeah.
an end of an era, especially for what Southwest has always been. And part of their pitch I mean, when they first started was that it's convenient business travel. And I think the fact that you board much faster with Southwest than you do when you fly other airlines. You get on, you get off
Yep.
so much faster. So, I mean, again, not a political problem to be dealt with or discussed, but it is, at least for me, something very sad, and I'm sad to see that go. Sad to see that change, and hopefully I would rather pay the, like, whatever you're going to nickel and dime me, put it in the ticket price. I don't want to pay, you know, $15 to have to sit not in the middle seat or whatever, and then by the time you're said and done, it's an extra $250 on top of the ticket price just to get where you're going. So anyway, parting thoughts. But I think with that wraps it up for this week. I want to thank y'all for listening. You can always find our content at legalinsurrection.com. We thank you for listening. Please like, share, send to people who you think might enjoy this as well. And you can find this episode and more at legalinsurrection.com/4. And we will talk to you next week.